Gaudete, gaudete, Christus es natus, ex Maria Virgine gaudete.
Welcome to the Rediscovery channel. This is the channel where I, Ivor Kovac, and my good friend Stilgar, and sometimes Great Pharaoh, take turns coming up with topics from history that the other person doesn't know about and often hasn't heard about. And today it is my turn, so I'm going to ask Stilgar, have you heard of Lucian of Samosata?
Nope, not at all.
Okay, well, where do you think this guy might be from?
So can you repeat the name to me one more time?
Lucian of Samosata.
Oh, Samosata.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not even gonna guess where that is. I'm gonna say it's gonna be so off. Well, where is it? Maybe you can just enlighten me.
Yeah. Okay, so Lucian of Samosata was from Syria,
Okay.
and he was born around 130 AD and died somewhere between 180 and the year 200. So it's not actually, there's not good documentation on when he died. He was born in Samosata, Syria, which today I believe still exists, but the name has changed somewhat. And his background, he was either Syrian or Assyrian. And this is kind of tricky because, as we've mentioned in other videos, the Assyrians, they eventually changed to speak Aramaic. They stopped using their original language and switched to speaking Aramaic. But of course, they have different origins from Syrians. You know, Syrians, they're descended from the Arameans, which is where the term Aramaic comes from. It's their language. And Aramaic was the language that was spoken in much of the Eastern Mediterranean at the time that Jesus was around when he was born. So it's uncertain whether this guy was Syrian or Assyrian, but either way, Aramaic was his first language. Now, as an adult, he actually becomes proficient in Greek, and so much so that he's able to speak it as though he is a native speaker. And eventually, he comes to identify culturally as Greek, even though he's not one. And he's famous for being a satirist. Yeah, he's a satirist, and he was critical of contemporary philosophers as well as hypocrisy and anything that he perceived as hucksterism, and there was a lot of hucksterism back then. He's
What
also
what does that mean? Sorry, non-native speaker. What does hucksterism mean?
hucksterism is where you try to trick somebody into buying something usually or believing something which is not true in order to gain something out of it.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So most of what is known about him comes from his own writings, which makes it difficult to speak of his life with full certainty because a lot of what he wrote is satirical and sarcastic in nature. But there are a few things that can be gleaned from his life. And so what I want to do is go through his life, and then when we're done with that, look at some samples of his work. So Lucian's parents, they wanted him to make a living without having to pay for an expensive education. So they apprenticed him to his maternal uncle, who made statues for a living. Now, as you know, statues was a very big part of the Roman Empire, and they made very good realistic statues, which is how we know how a lot of the emperors looked, as well as other people. So they tried to train him, put him into that type of career. His parents thought he might be good at sculpting because he used to take the wax from the writing tablets at school and make it into little images and sculptures of different things. However, it turned out that this was not the career for him. So the apprenticeship that he had with his uncle only lasted for one day. And basically, what happened is Lucien broke a piece of marble I don't know what size. I'm thinking it was probably a big chunk, designed to make a statue, like a life-size statue out of. But at any rate, he broke it, so his uncle beat him with a stick. And after that, he decided that making statues was not the career for him, and he ran back home. Um,
Kind of a expensive mistake, I imagine, if you break a big piece of marble. So
oh yeah, I imagine so.
yeah,
Yeah, and that's probably why he got beat up for it in the way that he did.
yeah, it's probably also why he decided not to do it anymore. It's kind of like I don't know. Anyway,
Yeah,
if you're
like it's
afraid of
not.
fear of failure, what and if you have your uncle looking over your shoulder, and it's kind of like an all or nothing kind of thing. With
Yeah,
yeah,
there's
it's
probably a
like brush.
learning curve to it, and
Yeah,
if he's going to
yeah,
be doing that again, he's going to get beat some more.
yeah,
So probably figured I can only take so much of this, and physically you can. Like, the Jews, uh, and they used to have, when they would whip people, they would flog people, you would stop at, I think, 39. So like they gave you 40 lashes, and but they would only count to 39 to allow a margin of error, because any more than that you could die, something like that.
yeah. It was
Um,
the same in Tsarist Russia as well. When you were they also had corporal punishments where you would get beaten by sticks, and then you like they would beat you. The guards would beat you until a doctor said that like you're about to die. But let's say you had like 2,000 stick beatings, then you only survived 500. Then they would send you off to the brig to get healed, or like the hospice, I guess, or what do you call it, like the whatever the hospital area of the prison camp, and then they would heal up your back. And then the day your back is healed, they would send you out for the rest of the beatings.
mm,
So yeah, crazy. But yeah, anyway, we're going off track already. So he didn't like to get beaten. So what else? What did he try to do instead? Like what was his next career move?
right. So his next career move is to become a rhetorician, to pursue rhetoric. So one of the quickest ways for a person who's not already rich to become successful during this time period was actually to pursue a rhetorical career, and you actually had a better shot becoming successful at this and achieving fame than going to the army, because this is a time when things were very peaceful, and it was the Pax Romana. So he decides to go and do this. Lucian was inspired actually by traveling rhetoricians who gave public lectures. So this was, a form of entertainment that they had back then. Remember, there's no TV. So you would go and listen to these people talk. And he heard some of them and decided, I can do this as well. So he begins, I guess, his first step on the career by moving to Western Anatolia, which is also referred to as Ionia. And in that area, today, of course, it's part of Turkey and it's full of Turks, but back then it was full of Greeks, and Greek was the main language. So while he's there, he becomes fluent in Greek, which is like the first step in his career path. So his rhetorical career lasts from about 145 to 164 AD. And possible tasks that a rhetorician would pursue, the way that he would make his living during this time, is speaking in court on behalf of a client, writing speeches for the client to give. Like if you don't want to go to court yourself, you'd write a speech for the defendant, teaching, and giving public displays of rhetoric, where I guess you would go to a theater or the public square, and there you would give lectures. And one of the ways that this would work is you would go in front of the audience and you'd have them suggest the topic, and then you'd pick it, and you'd try to give a persuasive speech on behalf of something, typically. So Lucian most likely made his living doing that, giving speeches to the audience and lectures, um, and quite often having the audience propose the topic and then the speaker giving a lecture on it. Now, of course, the thing is, you don't have to be completely knowledgeable about the facts to do this. You don't have to know everything. You just have to persuade people. So it's not an entirely honest career. Um, so he starts his career in Anatolia. Then he works into Greece. He goes into Greece and he works there for a while. Then Italy, and then Gaul. In Gaul, he held a position of importance and fame, supposedly, based on what he said in his works. And it's also most likely that he had knowledge of the Latin language as well, that he was able to converse in it, but he did not achieve the same level of fluency and proficiency in Latin as he had in Greek. And it's also in his work, in any of his works, he doesn't refer to any Latin authors. And that could be because he wasn't, that fluent in Latin, that he would sit and read their stuff, but also Lucian had kind of a low opinion of Romans, and by Romans we mean people that speak Latin as a first language, Western Europeans. He thought the Romans had no culture, which is an interesting thing for him to say because he actually abandoned his original culture and thoroughly assimilated into another. So he lived around, and it's interesting that he said that also because people today say that about Americans, like Americans have no culture. I kind of feel like the Romans were the Americans of the ancient world, basically. Um, so around 160 AD, Lucian returns to the Middle East, and at this time he's 35 years old. And probably he lived in Antioch and continued to work as a rhetorician. Then eventually he moves to Athens and he takes his father with him. And I don't know when his father dies, but I assume that that's a factor for him remaining in Athens. So while he's in Athens this time, he switches to a different career. So at 40 years old, he changes from rhetoric to dialogue, and there's actually an ongoing kind of dispute or feud between the fields of rhetoric and dialogue at this time, and the feud goes all the way back to the time of Socrates. So the reason for this, and a modern person that's listening might be thinking, well, what's the difference between rhetoric and dialogue? So rhetoric is an appeal to emotions, and the goal of it is persuasion, but not to get at the truth, regardless of the outcome. It's to persuade somebody is the outcome. The purpose of dialogue, on the other hand, was to arrive at the truth and present evidence for it. So this conflict, yeah, it went all the way back to the time of Socrates when he argued with sophists and developed the Socratic method. So rhetoric is or was the tool of lawyers. The defendant may or may not be guilty, but either way, you have to try to get him out of it however you can. Even if it's an emotional appeal, like, oh, this poor guy, he killed somebody, but he has a family of 10 to support. Maybe you should just let him off, like, stuff like that. Whereas dialogue was the tool of philosophers. So he begins dabbling with dialogue before he officially quits his rhetorical career. And there's a period of 162 to 163 AD when he starts writing some dialogues, even though he's still earning a living as a rhetorician. And during this time, he writes the Toxaris, the Anacharsis, and the Pantomime. And supposedly these are like pure dialogues that are adhering to the proper form of dialogue. But then even after changing careers, Lucian, he also gets tired of dialogue. And he concludes that the pursuit of philosophy is hopeless. He says that he still values philosophy, but instead of trying to create pure dialogues, and he focuses on criticizing the people who present themselves as being teachers in philosophy. So he finds flaws with the philosophers more so than the philosophy, basically. The Parasite is his first work, which combines satire with dialogue. And from then on, he focuses on satire and criticism mainly. So he's not going to do any more just pure dialogues adhering to the proper forms.
Oh, but why did he think it was hopeless?
I guess so. A good question. I think it has to do with the people that are teaching the philosophy being corrupt individuals themselves and having apparent flaws, and also not being entirely honest.
So he was attracted to this to philosophy because he wanted to find the truth.
Yeah.
And then he wrote 3 books using this dialogue technique.
Yeah.
And then he decides actually it's not possible to find the truth this way.
Yeah, I think he was realizing that humanity is corrupt and not really good by nature, and he doesn't find a solution to that. At least that's my understanding.
So he becomes
Black-pilled.
disenchantized, and then he moves over to this new philosophy, I would say, or
Mockery and criticism. He
yeah,
starts
okay,
making fun of the teachers, basically.
okay.
And he was aware of Christianity, um, and he rejected that as a viable system. And when we get to, that's actually one of his works that I want to go over. We'll talk about what his views on Christianity were. Today, if he were alive today, he'd probably be considered an atheist. I give him like a 99% chance that he would choose atheism if he was alive today. From what I've read of his works, it seems more like he was an agnostic. Um, he wasn't close to the idea of the Greek gods being real, but he did not believe that they intervened in the physical world. Like the stories about Zeus impregnating different women, he was skeptical of that stuff. He didn't believe in a lot of the non-human mythological species, the sentient forms of life like cyclopses and things like that. He thought that was all a bunch of nonsense. Um, Generally rejected supernatural accounts of the supernatural in any form.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, but yeah, let's keep going. We'll come to some of his works too. We can look more at his thought process. So the satirical career lasts from 165 to 175 AD, which corresponds to this time that he lives in Athens, staying there for about 10 years. And I think during this time, probably his father dies, which might be a factor in him eventually deciding to move on. But I don't know that. That's my guess. So most of his surviving works were written during this time. One of his most famous work is something called A True Story, which I'll come back to that. We'll cover some more of that, but it's actually not a true story. It's something that's written to mock the people that were writing like these travel logs. Like, I visited India and saw a tribe of Amazons and guys with goat legs, men with dog heads. It's the truth. Or I visited Africa and saw the tribe of headless men. A lot of the stuff you remember when we talked about the medieval mythology, right? Where
Yeah,
yeah.
for sure.
So
Yeah.
some of that those folk beliefs actually can be traced back to the Roman times and earlier, when people were writing fake travel logs about like what they saw in other parts of the world. And if you go there yourself, you'll see it too. And of course, they can't go there, so there's
So
no
it's just
worry.
something entertaining. So they were selling a story, really. So
They were, well, yeah, but the custom continues up into the medieval period because Sir John Mandeville, which was actually a French priest, not a guy named Sir John Mandeville, but the guy that wrote it, he says, "I swear it's true. You can go and see for yourself." So this practice was still going on, well after the fall of the Roman Empire, and even in the church, of course. But this is something that Lucien just hated, and he thought this stuff was obviously fake, and it got on his nerves. So that's one of the things he wrote in response to this. After writing satire for 10 years, it seems as though he retired and just kind of chilled for a while and wrote almost nothing at all, except for something called The Life of Demonax and something about Alexander, this guy called Alexander the Asiatic Charlatan. And then the next thing that happens is in his life and is that he gets an official legal post in Egypt. The Emperor Commodus appoints him to a position there when he's already pretty old. And during this time, he begins to read his dialogues publicly again, but writes very little in the way of new material. And then he dies in Egypt after having struggled with gout for a while. And the exact cause of death is not known. There's one theory that he was actually ripped apart by dogs. Of course, it's really it's not well documented.
that
And
sounds like something his critics would say, probably.
right, so a lot of Christians did not like Lucian of Samosata because of what he said about us.
Mm.
And there's a theory that somebody wrote this because of his criticism of Christianity. Of course, even if you dislike him and what he said, if you're a Christian, you're not supposed to lie. So who knows, right? I mean,
And people did get ripped up by dogs, but then again, it's kind of suspicious in this case, I would say.
I
So,
feel suspicious of it as well, but I also wouldn't rule it out either. The Byzantines, during the Byzantine period, this guy was held up as like a good author, even though they considered him to be an atheist. They thought that his writing was good and his style. And of course, they could read it because it's all in Greek. So that's basically what I know about his life. Now, what I want to do is read a little bit of Passing of Peregrinus, which is one of his works that he did. And this is where he gives his opinion about Christianity. Of course, the main topic of Peregrinus is this guy who was a sociopath and killed his own father because he didn't want to have to look after his father in his old age. And then after that, he makes a living by getting people to follow him, joining different religions, getting people to follow him and make donations to him. And for a while, he pretends to be a Christian and he lives off of the donations of Christians. So Lucien, he hated that guy, but he also had contempt for Christians as well. So I have that one here, and I'll put links to this below. But this is Passing of Peregrinus. So I'm not going to read the whole thing. We'll read the part that pertains to us. And if anybody wants to read the whole thing, they can do so. Let's see. I think page 7 here is where he starts talking about Christians. Okay. So it was then that he learned the wondrous lore of the Christians by associating with their priests and scribes in Palestine. And how else could it be? In a trice, he made them all look like children, for he was a prophet, cult leader, head of the synagogue, and everything all by himself. He interpreted and explained some of their books and even composed many, and they revered him as a god, made use of him as a lawgiver, and set him down as a protector. Next after that other, to be sure, whom they still worship, the man who was crucified in Palestine because he introduced this new cult into the world. Then at length Proteus was apprehended for this and thrown into prison, which itself gave him no little reputation as an asset for his future career and the charlatanism and notoriety seeking that he was enamored of. Well, when he had been in prison, the Christians, regarding the incident as a calamity, left nothing undone in the effort to rescue him. Then, as this was impossible, every other form of attention was shown him, not in any casual way, but with assiduity, and from the very break of day, aged widows and orphans, children, could be seen waiting near the prison, while their officials even slept inside with him after bribing the guards. Then elaborate meals were brought in, and sacred books of theirs were read aloud. And excellent Peregrinus, for he still went by that name, was called by them the new Socrates. Indeed, people came even from the cities in Asia, sent by the Christians at their common expense, to succor and defend and encourage the hero. They show incredible speed whenever any such public action is taken, for in no time they lavish their all. So it was then in the case of Peregrinus. Much money came to him from them by reason of his imprisonment, and he procured not a little revenue from it. The poor wretches have convinced themselves, first and foremost, that they are going to be immortal and live for all time, in consequence of which they despise death, and even willingly give themselves into custody, most of them. Furthermore, their first lawgiver persuaded them that they are all brothers of one another, after they have transgressed once and for all by denying the Greek gods and by worshipping that crucified sophist himself and living under his laws. Therefore they despise all things indiscriminately and consider them common property, receiving such doctrines traditionally without any definite evidence. So if any charlatan and trickster able to profit by occasions comes among them, he quickly acquires sudden wealth by imposing upon simple folk. So basically, after a while, this guy is exposed, and then he moves on to scam some other people, and eventually he dies by setting himself on fire. So if anybody wants to read the whole story of Peregrinus according to Lucian of Samosata, I'll link it below. You can download the PDF. Also found something that I think is like a compilation of most of his works, perhaps all of them. That will be there as well. So it's kind of interesting because the way that Lucian describes the Christians as acting is also lines up with how they behaved according to the book of Acts, when the early church was kind of forming. So any questions about that, or?
No, I'm just curious, like why did you pick this this description of Peregrinus? What's this guy called?
The guy's
Like
name was Peregrinus.
yeah, why did you pick it? Like what made you pick it
What made
specifically?
me choose this as an example
Yeah.
of his work?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't remember how I came across this. But one of the reasons I chose it is because, there's a lot of atheists today that, they say stuff like there's no evidence that Jesus ever existed and he's just made up. But that wasn't the view at the time that Jesus was around, or even the next century. Like Lucien, he's old enough that he would have known people that would have been around during that time. So I thought
Yeah,
it
no,
was
I think it was well documented that he was crucified, but yeah,
right.
I mean,
Like
yeah,
Lucian didn't say, that the Christians made this guy up. He just thought that we were stupid for following him. And of course, it's interesting that he describes Jesus as a sophist, which means that he probably associates him with the field of rhetoric. And of course, this is after Lucian himself had left the field of rhetoric. And I think probably after
although
he
I
also.
would say probably this Peregrinus fellow was also using rhetoric to dupe people into paying him money, right?
Right. Yeah. Lucian did not like this guy at all.
So he's basically, yeah. I mean, there are people in the church still today that are abusing faith and rhetoric to try and get money out of people. So basically, this I forgot Lucianus or Lucy. How do you say his name?
Lucian.
Lucien.
Lucian, yeah.
He hated people that were like faking it.
Hucksters
Yeah, hucksters.
that
Okay.
would squeeze money off of people, and there were a lot of poor people, but they would still give money to causes they believed in, even false causes.
Well, did he use because this Peregrinus guy did sound like he was a fake, right? But did he use that then to smear all of Christianity,
uh
or
i I
because
think
that's
this
something a modern atheist would do?
so he's not using Peregrinus to smear Christianity. He's smearing Peregrinus, uh but he's mentioning his time that he spent scamming the Christians. But Lucian also thought that Jesus was a scam as well.
Seems kind of like a poor scam if you get crucified when you're doing it. But yeah,
Right. Yeah, and all of
and
Jesus's disciples were killed in horrible ways, except for
yeah,
John the Revelator, which
and it's not like Jesus got rich. So yeah, it's kind of weird. But okay,
yeah.
I don't see the logic there. But okay, but maybe yeah, because a scam usually means that you don't believe it yourself. You're actually pretending in order to gain something. But
Peregrinus was pretending he didn't actually believe in Jesus, and when
yeah,
that no longer worked out for him, he went on to
and he was
something
trying
else.
to make money out of it. But but in Jesus' case, he believed in it, so it's not pretending, and he didn't really get out of anything out of it except like everybody hating him and in the end crucifying him. So yeah. Anyway, okay, but what's the other part that you got from Lucius about
So,
Christians?
all right. Well, no, that's it for
Okay.
that. What I want to do now is talk about the true story a little bit and read some of that. I'm not going to read the whole thing of this either. This is actually longer than Peregrinus. And true story is actually what put me onto this guy in the first place, because I saw some people claiming that Lucian of Samosata is actually the first writer of sci-fi in human history. So, of
Oh,
course, being a connoisseur of sci-fi, I had to check it out. Um,
that's
so,
cool. Yeah.
yeah. So he actually didn't intend on anything like that. His goal was to make something to mock the outrageous travel tales that were going on here during his time. But the difference is he admits that everything he's about to write is a lie to begin with, kind of like just a mocking parody of these things. And to show how easily, I guess, to show how easily it is to make stuff up. Of course, a lot of people really cannot, don't have the talent to just make stuff up. I've always thought it was easy because you're just making stuff up as you go. But
So did he write a good sci-fi book just to mock people that make up stories? Because that would be really funny.
yeah, I actually, his A True Story kind of reads somewhat like a Edgar Rice Burroughs story.
Okay.
Um, the only thing is, this guy was not a Christian, so he did put in some stuff that is not stuff that we like. Like there's some gay in this story. Normally, and fair warning, if you're gonna read this story, there will be some gay, and it, man, not just gay, but like man boy gay. Like one of
Oh,
the yeah, I mean not described in detail, but like that's one of the recommendations that is given to the main character. He says like if you're gonna be gay, just do it with boys, not with men. I was like, you got to be kidding. But like again, this whole thing is sarcastic. So for all I know, that he doesn't really mean it when the main character is
he's
given
trying to
that
make fun of
advice.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But and there's regular normal sex in there as well. But other than that stuff, I did enjoy reading this work. It was interesting. It was very original. But read a little bit of his preface here. So, okay. So basically, he's mentioning other guys here, how they write about strange things in other parts of the world. And then he says, like, this problem actually began with Ulysses, the main character in the Odyssey. So, but the first father and founder of all this foolery was Homer's Ulysses, who tells a long tale to Alkenos of the servitude of the winds and of wild men with one eye in their foreheads that fed upon raw flesh of beasts with many heads, and the transformation of his friends by enchanted potions, all which he made the silly fakies believe for great sooth. This coming to my perusal, I could not condemn ordinary men for lying, when I saw it in request among them that would be counted philosophical persons, yet could not but wonder at them, that writing so manifest lies, they should not think to be taken with the manner. And this made me also ambitious to leave some monument of myself behind me, that I might not be the only man exempted from this liberty of lying, and because I had no matter of verity to employ my pen in, for nothing hath befallen me worth the writing, I turned my style to publish untruths, but with an honester mind than others have done. For this one thing I confidently pronounce for a truth, that I lie, and this I hope may be an excuse for all the rest, when I confess what I am faulty in, for I write of manners which I neither saw nor suffered, nor heard by report from others, which are in no being, nor possible ever to have a beginning. Let no man therefore in any case give any credit to them. So that's the preface that he does, and the main character in this story is the author himself. It's a self-insert. He writes in the first person. Just read a couple pages. So I'm gonna just read some of this so that you can get a feeling in our audience for the story. So on the morrow we put to sea again, the wind serving us weakly. But about noon, when we had lost sight of the island, upon a sudden whirlwind caught us, which turned our ship round about and lifted us up some 3,000 furlongs into the air, and suffered us not to settle again into the sea. But we hung above the ground, and were carried aloft with a mighty wind, which filled our sails strongly. Thus for 7 days' space and so many nights were we driven along in that manner, and on the 8th day we came in view of a great country in the air, like a shining island, of a round proportion, gloriously glittering with light, and approaching to it, we there arrived, and took land, and surveying the country we found it to be both inhabited and husbanded. And as long as the day lasted, we could see nothing there. But when night was come, many other islands appeared unto us, some greater and some less, all of the color of fire, and another kind of earth underneath, in which were cities, and seas, and rivers, and woods, and mountains, which we conjectured to be the earth by us inhabited. And going further into the land, we were met withal, and taken by those kind of people which they call Hippogippians. These Hippogippians are men riding upon monstrous vultures, which they use instead of horses. For the vultures there are exceeding great, every one with 3 heads apiece. You may imagine their greatness by this, for every feather in their wings was bigger and longer than the mast of a tall ship. Their charge was to fly about the country, and all the strangers they found to bring them to the king, and their fortune was then to seize upon us, and by them we were presented to him. As soon as he saw us, he conjectured by our habit what countrymen we were, and said, Are not you strangers, Grecians? Which, when we affirmed, And how could you make way? Said he, Though so much air as to get hither. Oh, and how could you make way, said he, that through so much air as to get hither? Then we delivered the whole discourse of our fortunes to him, whereupon he began to tell us likewise of his own adventures, how that he also was a man by name Endymion, and wrapped up long since from the earth as he was asleep, and brought hither, where he was made king of the country, and said it was that region which to us below seems to be the moon. But he bade us be of good cheer, and fear no danger, for we should want nothing. Uh, we stood in need of, and if the war he he was now in hand, withal against the sun, succeeded fortunately, we should live with him in the highest degree of happiness. All right, I think that's enough. But what do you think of that, Stilgar?
Sounds like an interesting story.
Yes. So it is interesting. One thing that's kind of gross is these guys that live on the moon. This alien species. They only exist in the male form, and they have to do everything with each other, and the men also bear the children. So, like I
Yeah,
said, there's like
wasn't that part of was that Greek mythology or was that actually Norse mythology? I think it was Norse mythology where you first there were only men. And
you're probably thinking of the golden race,
mm-hmm.
but this is which is part of Greek mythology. I don't know if the golden race had women as well, but no, this is not. So what he's doing is he's basically rejecting most of the Greek mythology and making up stuff as he goes.
Mm.
So these aliens are not part of the Greek mythology. So basically, what happens is the ship gets jacked up into the atmosphere pretty high, and it remains there. And then it comes to the moon, which is like a big island floating in the sky, of which the underside glows down. You know, it's like from Earth, we see the underside basically. It's like a round circle. Um, and he spends some time there, and then he also spends some time inside of a whale that swallows their ship. And in this whale, there's like there's people living inside. There's like some land masses and stuff. So he's very creative. He comes up with different species. Um, I should say also that when they leave the moon, they don't go straight back to Earth, but they land on other stars where there's different forms of sentient life ruling, and like they have their own kings and stuff. So it's this story. I suppose there's two reasons why it's considered sci-fi. Because if you read the ancient mythology, like the Hindu and Greek and Norse, it does have a kind of sci-fi feel to it. And with Norse and Hindu mythology in particular, there are other worlds in it. However, that stuff was considered to be true by the people that adhered to those religions. So it's not science fiction. It's just part of their lore. Whereas this is completely made up and it involves leaving the Earth and visiting other worlds. So I guess that's why it's considered science fiction. I still kind of have my doubts about this being the first sci-fi story ever written. I
I
mean,
doubt it too, but maybe that
yeah,
survived at least, or that we know of.
maybe that we know of. Yeah, that's probably fair to say. We're talking about the second century AD. But again, like what exactly constitutes sci-fi is a little bit subjective. It kind of uh, there's not like a clear line, for example, between science fiction and fantasy.
Well,
Um,
no, well, typically it's science that drives the fiction. That's why it's called science fiction.
it's
Otherwise, it would be fantasy. Like I would, for example, say that Star Wars is more fantasy than science fiction.
I agree.
But
Yeah,
yeah, because it uses things like the source and or the force,
of course.
whatever. Um, yeah, and whereas with Star Trek, it's like it's more about phasers and photon torpedoes and whatnot.
But yes,
Yeah,
but then you have in Star Trek stuff that also operates like you have the Q, which are clearly like the gods of that universe, that don't really have a clear beginning and ending. And then you have like other another series called Farscape, which um, does have science in it, like genetic engineering and faster than light travel, but then it also has mysticism and stuff about the afterlife, and magic, like actual character that does magic comes in around like I forget which season, but
Yeah, I
yeah,
guess the lines can get
you can
pretty blurry. Yeah.
yeah, you can muddy the lines a bit. So yeah, I mean, I have to read more ancient literature. Maybe as I do so, other things will show up. I've also been reading the Egyptian literature, which is pretty interesting. Um, now I'll come to that more later when I get to my when I come back to Egypt with that other topic. But yeah, it's like there's an Egyptian story too that I read, which I guess would be considered not science fiction but fantasy, where this guy he he shipwrecks on this island where there's like a giant sentient snake with a beard. Um, and then the island is like a fantasy place with all the nice things that you want to eat, kind of like the Irish legend of Tir na Nog. But it sinks after he leaves. I think this I can tell you what that story is called. That one is called The Tale of the Shipwrecked Sailor. It's part of a book I have that's a compilation of old Egyptian literature from the Middle Period Kingdom. So I think that one probably could be counted as fantasy because it looks more like it's not a specific god. It's more like something that somebody's making up as well. It doesn't seem like a part of their religion, although I guess it would be set within the backdrop of their religion. But at any rate, yeah, I think that's I'm getting off the what do you call it? Off the wagon or whatever.
Yeah, the main
But
thread of the story. Yeah.
yeah. But I mean that's all I have on this guy. Um I think he's an
What
interesting.
made you pick him? Like, well, what made you pick him as like your topic for the week?
Well,
How did you
so
find out about him?
I found out about him on a video that somebody did on YouTube saying that this is the first ever sci-fi story written. So that was like over a year ago that I found out about him. And then I ordered the book and I read it when I was on a business trip. Um, and I thought it was good, except for those few disgusting things that I mentioned. I love mythology and sci-fi and fantasy, and I like to read about other cultures, and I also like to write and draw myself. Like for me, the kind of entertainment that I enjoy the most is like um, stuff that's set in like a fully or a well-developed universe, like a universe that has a life of its own, a complete set of mythology. And so examples of that I would give is, of course, you have the old Greek and Norse or Germanic and Indian mythologies, which are probably my favorite real-world mythologies to look at and read stories from. But then as far as like pure fiction or stuff that's intended as fiction, but also can be counted as mythology, I would consider like the Middle Earth that Tolkien wrote, where he writes his whole origin of the world and how it's created and then starts writing the histories of it. Of course, his writing focuses mainly on one part of his world, but he mentions bits and pieces of it tangentially. And then of course I'm a big Star Trek fan. I hate the new Trek, which I don't recognize, but Star Trek is a system of mythology where like you know what a Klingon is, so you can and what a Romulan is and all this stuff, and the history of the universe, and so you could, like, if I wanted to, you know I could write a story about like uh Cardassian going to the Klingon Empire and how he's going to behave, how he's going to be treated, because there's lore there. So those are my favorite kind of stories and settings. Um, Stuff I like much less that impresses me not at all is stuff that's intended to be like a one-off. Like, for example, the when I was in my teens, there was a movie, I think it was called Independence Day, and it was about aliens attacking the Earth, and Will Smith is like an Air Force pilot, and he goes and he fights the aliens. So I didn't care for that, people made such a big deal of it because, special effects are kind of new in the 90s and they're able to do more stuff that they couldn't do previously. But I felt like technology, and especially with new stuff that's being made now, technology is being used as a crutch to make up for a lack of storytelling and a lack of original ideas. And I found the Will Smith movie. I mean, I did like Will Smith when I was a kid, but I found that particular movie to be very just lacking in anything I'd consider good or interesting or gripping. And I really don't understand why it was so successful as it was. But I think a lot of the entertainment, even back in the 90s, was just designed to appeal to the low-hanging fruit, make something that's dumb but has the basic elements that will get the most amount of people in, and it's forgettable. And I didn't want to know more about that world or the aliens in it. Now, another thing is Star Wars, and I don't hate Star Wars. I did enjoy watching the original Star Wars movies, but like there's a lot of aliens in Star Wars, but they're completely irrelevant because they're not developed culturally. They just kind of exist as props. So, like in Star Wars, the only cultural distinctions that matter are the Empire and the Rebels. Like you could delete all of the alien species from Star Wars, and the storyline wouldn't be affected in the least bit. They're completely irrelevant. And so I liked the story. Like Star Wars, I consider as something that I did like the story. I thought it was a good story. And at least for the older movies, I thought the action sequences were good and I liked the characters, but I did not care at all about the universe or to learn any more about it. So,
Yeah, just want to say Independence Day.
mm,
Um, I enjoyed it at the time, but there are definitely things in the movie that don't make any sense or are inconsistent. Um, but I did find it appealing, I guess, because of the special effects were pretty good at the time, and also the ruthlessness with which the aliens were wiping out humans, I guess. But then, like, it gets kind of ridiculous how they write like a virus, which is like so 90s, like a computer virus or something that's gonna take down their whole shields. Yeah.
yeah, and I have
Anyway.
my own views about aliens and how they would be if they exist. And I've had lots of discussions with people and also with my kids about that kind of stuff. But I think okay, so to answer your original question about why in particular I covered this guy, he's just one of the many things that was kind of on my list of things to do eventually. And I want to try to, like, as we've discussed, have something every week. So I'm thinking, if I'm working on something big that's taking a while, in the meantime, I can do something small. So yeah. uh,
Yeah, interesting guy. And I think it was an interesting discussion.
yeah.
So yeah, I think it was a good one. And I
Mm.
think actually I'll be able to connect my video next time to this one, but I'm not going to spoil it yet. How? So you have to join the next one to find out. Yeah,
I will be surprised.
yeah.
Or maybe I won't be surprised. We'll have to see what you come up with.
Okay.
But alrighty then. I guess we
All
can
right,
close
Ivor.
it off. Yeah. Thanks
Thanks.
for
Appreciate it. And
yep. Leave us a
like,
comment.
share, and yeah, what we were discussing before, we never delete any comments. Just so you know. So if you don't want your comment to get deleted, it's not us. I think you're probably safer posting. We're also on BitChute and on Rumble.
Cool.
So we appreciate your comments. We get them. If you want to make sure that it actually shows up, maybe post it there just to be case, because yeah, sometimes comments are just disappearing due to the algorithm or something. We don't know. So yeah.
Mm.
Anyway, just thought I'd put it in there. So
Alrighty then. If you made
all
it to
right.
the end, thank you for listening and congratulations. And other than that, I'll see you guys in the next one.
See you in the next one.
Deus homo factus est natura mirante, mundus renovatus est a Christo regnante. Gaudete, Christus est natus, ex Maria Virgine gaudete.